Hello everyone, welcome back to Major Hi-Fi. I am Luke. Today we're going to be talking about 64Audio's new U6t. So the U6t was originally a custom IEM from 64Audio. It was one of their most popular models, and now it is a universal model, which is what we have right here. And I am quite excited to get into this one because I have heard a large number of IEMs from 64Audio. One of my first reviews on this channel actually was of the U18S, and I'm a huge fan of it to this day. And this one runs for about half the price of most of the ones that I've tried from them. I've tried like the U12T, the U18S, the TIA Trio, U18T, and they all run 2,500 upwards, I think, maybe 2,000 one of them is, but this is a $12.99, so it's a bit, it's not cheap, but it's not quite as expensive as a lot of the ones I've tried. I haven't tried a model from 64Audio in this sort of more middle price range of their price range, that is, not middle of everyone's price range, of course. So yeah, let's just get into it. So if I open this up, you can see we've got the IEMs here, and then inside of this case is where all of the other magical, delightful things are. So first of all, we have the ear tips, which are in this cool spaceship looking thing, and we've got quite a few sets of rubber and foam ear tips. Then inside of this little bag here, we get a couple other fun little doodads. Namely, we get the Apex modules, also known as air pressure exchange. We are offered 3 different options. One of them is already in the IEMs. We've got minus 15 decibels, minus 10 decibels, and minus 20 decibels. And these basically are supposed to take the air out of your ear canal and help to relieve any sort of listener's fatigue. And then they also kind of change the coloring or the format of the sound. It's all debatable, but I'll give you my insights on that later on. And then we also get this handy dandy little clip if you want to clip these IEMs, the cable, anything that you're wearing or whatever, and then a nice little cleaning brush to brush your IEMs, or if you have really small teeth, this could also work really well for those. We also get this nice hard shell leather case. It's got quite a bit of room inside here, so no problem fitting these in here, and it is very protective, as you would want it to be. All right, so here they are, the U6t. These have basically the same shape as every 64Audio IEM I've tried at least, which is a nice sort of rounded edge and this kind of simple, just, solid color on the body. These don't have the loudest design I've ever seen from 64Audio, like the U18S has that really weird, cool pattern on the back. These are a little bit more straight up and, low key. But I do like this silvery 64 logo with the clear coating over it. It's very luxurious looking, very modern. It's a nice look. These are definitely classy. Fit-wise, these are kind of interesting to me because they really don't touch your ears much. Every time I put in a pair of 64Audio IEMs, I'm like, how do these things stay in again? I don't really understand, because they do. They're very firm, but they don't anchor into your ears at that many points. They really don't touch your ears that much. It's really just the kind of spout here on the front with, of course, the ear tip on it. Just goes in there, and then, you put the cable over the back of your ear. That's how IEMs work. But with these, it's really not touching your ear that much, but it just sort of stays in there. I don't know what kind of sorcery is being done, but I've never had a problem with them falling out. I just don't really know why that is, because I'm used to IEMs that don't anchor into my ear that strongly being very loose. But these are very snug and very comfortable. The cable on these definitely feels a bit better quality than the cables I've seen from 64Audio in the past. It has this nice shiny coating on the outside that makes it extra hard to tangle because it's kind of got a nice slip to it, if that makes sense. And it's definitely sturdier. It feels sturdier and more bulky than their other cables. Not too bulky, but definitely far from flimsy. And I just think that this extra coating on the outside is really what sort of changes it up for me. These use 6 balanced armature drivers. We've got 2 for the low, 2 for the mid, 1 for the high mid, and then 1 of 64Audio's TIA drivers for the high. The TIA driver is designed by 64Audio. It's a tubeless driver, and they claim that this reduces resonance and creates a transparent, lifelike sound. These have a frequency response of 10 Hz to 20 kHz and an impedance of 10 ohms. All right, so why don't we go ahead and talk about how these sound? Okay, so these IEMs, you guys, I just can't express my excitement to talk about these because I've had quite the experience just getting to listen to these, and I am sort of in love with them, I guess. Just spoiler alert, I really love these. I guess what I was at first so struck by is that, like I said, I've listened to a lot of models from 64Audio that are often more than twice the price of this. And so I really didn't know quite what to expect. I had high expectations, but I was kind of trying to manage them because I knew that these cost a lot less. And they get so shockingly close in quality to some of these way more expensive models. I almost like started to forget that, you know, $12.99 is still a lot of money. I was like, these are a steal, but they kind of are in a way. Just hear me out. We're talking like, you know, $3,000 here for an IEM and other models from 64Audio. So in the world of 64Audio, these are kind of a really good deal actually. And I'll get into why in more details. But yeah, overall, like, I know I normally sum things up last, but I feel like I just need to preface this by being like, these are some of the best IEMs in this price range I've ever used, and I just can't get enough of them. All right, so soundstage wise, these, like all of 64Audio's IEMs, are gonna have a soundstage that is pretty hard to beat. They are just so wide. They are impossibly wide for an IEM. I don't understand how they do it. You know, with all my knowledge of sound, that's kind of beyond me, how these things sound so wide. The sound separation and imaging on these is so realistic and just successful that it kind of gives you that sensation where you listen to a song you've heard a million times and you're like, since when was that there? And when was that sound there? And when was that melody there? And all these, you know, like, suddenly these realizations of like, wait, there's background vocals. It just gives this very honest, kind of hyper-realistic presentation of music, and it causes you to see things that maybe you missed, you know, even over hundreds of listens, at least for me. You know, of course I listen closer when I'm engaging with a new pair of headphones or an IEM, but sometimes it just kind of shows you things you didn't even realize were there, and it's very exciting, honestly, to use an IEM that's that capable. I listened to Kelsey Lou's cover of 10cc's I'm Not in Love, and this mix is already pretty wide and pretty holographic, but on the U6t, it was just taken to new levels of cinema and just hugeness. It was just so big. There's these bass sounds that were like so warm and vibrating on the outskirts of the stereo spectrum, these crazy vocal stacks. It just was bringing such a new energy to the song that was so refreshing. That's what I would call the soundstage on these. It's refreshing. It's just like, oh my gosh, I can hear every single thing so clearly, and there's just all this air in between every sound, and you're just breathing it in. All right, so in terms of low end, these definitely have a very full, very deep low end. It's definitely a very satisfying bass response. It gives you that nice kind of chest punch feel, but not too much of it, you know, so there's a nice amount of cinema, but not so much kind of huge engulfment from the bass that it's overpowering the rest of the mix or it's just unnecessarily boosted. They have a pretty tight grip on the low end. It's not contained though. That's what I like about it, is it's not overly contained or kind of like controlled. But it does keep a tight grip on them to keep any sort of bleed or mud just out of the question. It's definitely similar to the bass response I've heard from other 64Audio IEMs, such as the U18S or the Tia Trio, where it's got that nice depth and body to it, but it knows its place and it knows exactly how far it can go without being too much. It felt like it struck this good balance of kind of that live bass sound, you know, that speaker system bass sound, and then a more up-close, intimate kind of in-your-head bass sound. A good sort of blend of those two styles, which I personally like a little bit of both. So yeah, just a very balanced, all-encompassing bass response. I listened to a lot of songs by the artist Kalela, who has really great production on her music and a lot of bass, to say the least. And these handled those songs with such grace and just beauty. It was giving enough power to the bass to create some light vibrations, some physicality, but it once again was just really taking it to that maximum point of kind of impact where it wasn't crossing the line of just taking over the mix. It's got that very clean bass that just makes you want to keep on turning up the volume, even though you know you probably shouldn't for the sake of your ears, but sometimes you just kind of splurge and go all in, because when you have a bass response like this, that no matter the volume or power or what you put into it, it comes out so clean and well handled, you just want to hear more. so in terms of mid-range, one of the first things I actually noticed about these when I listened to them is that the high mid is pretty subdued. So these are not going to have that kind of sharper, really forward, extra snappy high mid. But then at the same time, they're able to cut the high mid so particularly and so expertly that it doesn't feel like it's being taken away. So even though they have this sort of softened, smooth, warmed up edge on the mid-range, they manage to kind of hide from you, the dirty work, or whatever you want to call it, that's going on under the hood to make it sound that way. I find that with a lot of IEMs where the mid-range is being pulled back a bit, or maybe more than a bit, that I tend to feel like I'm getting kind of a sonic reimagining of every recording or song I play on them, because it just seems like I'm hearing the, less mid-range version of this song as opposed to like the best version of this song or whatever. And this is like a great example of doing those adjustments in a way that doesn't feel distracting and way too overt, which I also said about the U18S. It's just a very natural sound. And even though of course there's cutting and boosting going on, it just doesn't feel like it's so in your face. But if you actually stop and think about it, you're like, well, no, this is definitely a fair amount of modulation going on, because this song or that song is normally too harsh in the mid-range and now it's totally smoothed out, so something's going on here. But you just don't think about it in the moment, and that's a nice feeling, especially when you're writing a headphone review and all you're doing is thinking about the sound and thinking about what's different, what's here, or what's there. It's really nice when I can listen to an IEM and my first thoughts are not, oh, really bright, or oh, really, sharp, or whatever. Even if it's not a bad thing, my first thoughts on this were not about anything technical. They were just, wow, this sounds so good. The low mids on these have a bit more of a neutral character. They're pushed forward, not so much, because I feel like if they were pushed forward more, they might kind of start to overpower the pretty delicate high mid that these have with its, very soft response. But they do create a nice sense of warmth. I listened to a lot of Wise Blood on these, and that was like the perfect artist for the mid-range on these, honestly, because they're such vintage kind of colored mixes. And with the mid-range on these, it gives the perfect balance of like presence, but then also keeping that tonality really well. So the high end, at this point, maybe you're tired of hearing me just go on and on about how much I love these, but buckle up because it's about to get more intense, because the high end on these was maybe my favorite part. I think that these have like the perfect high end, to my ears at least, and I feel like to many of your ears, dare I say. The U6t is bright. It's a bright IEM, but it manages to do it very selectively. It's this very delicate, silky, kind of impossibly purified high end. And of course, the high end is where we have the TIA driver, which is 64 Audio's tubeless driver. And they do claim it's supposed to have this lifelike sound. And I hear a lot of marketing jargon from different headphone companies, and I tend to brush it off, but every once in a while they say something where I'm like, you guys are correct on that claim. And that is a case of that, where like the TIA driver does do that. I will give them that. It really does deliver on the high end. And these do just manage to avoid any harshness whatsoever. I don't know how they do it, but it's just this beautiful, smooth, warmed up high end, but you don't lose any sense of detail. And there's a really crisp edge to them, but it's that like really nice combination of smooth and crisp where it's not overly articulating to the point of kind of like snapping too loudly in your ears, but it's not so warmed up and smoothed out that you're losing those kind of nice edges to the sound. It brings out a very fluid, breathy quality in a lot of vocals. It really brings out a nice thin layer of shine on them that creates a great kind of just blanket over the top of the song. I feel like these have one of those rare high ends where I would recommend it to kind of anyone. I normally am like, this headphone or this IEM is for people that love brightness, or if you love darkness, or if you want super balanced or super neutral. I mean, maybe these are a little neutral on the high end, but I feel like they are bright, but I feel like they would kind of please almost any taste because they're just so well handled that even if you liked a darker sound, you would still be into this because it's not so intense in the high end. But if you liked a brighter sound, you would appreciate that these deliver brightness without giving you all the kind of grimy, icky parts of it. All right, so in terms of these Apex modules, we've got 3 different options. We have the light gray, which is -20. Then we've got the dark gray, which are in these right now, and that is -15. And then the black ones are -10. So I'll just give you a brief sort of rundown of what I heard from them. So for the light gray ones, the -20, I feel like there was a little bit less shine on the high end. Like the mid-range was warmed up a bit more, especially in that high mid area. Maybe even extra warmth was given there. There's already a lot of warmth, of course, in this area as is. And then the bass felt tightened up a bit. For the dark gray ones, which are the -15, that was what I used for most of this review. They're the ones that come already in it. They were the most neutral to me. They had the strongest bass response and probably the most neutral high end, and probably the most balanced mid-range of 3 also. So they just felt like a good choice to stick with one for most of the review, not make things confusing. So yeah, those just seem to me like probably my go-to personally on these, especially because they had the most bass and I like a lot of bass. The black ones, the -10, felt like they upped the high end a bit, more than probably the -15 or -20. And they also accentuated the mid-range a bit more. And then they tightened the bass a fair amount, probably a good amount, like less sub-range or just a much tighter sub-range. So a more contained bass sound from the black one, which could be good if you feel like the bass on these is maybe just a tad too strong for you. None of these are meant to really transform the sound of these IEMs or anything. They're just a nice kind of opportunity to customize a bit, switch them in or out based on what mood you're in or whatnot. But yeah, I think that they really do add a nice kind of flair and different flavor that you can play around with and see which one is best for you. Okay, I wanted to do some comparisons to some other IEMs in this price range. So compared to say Campfire's Andromeda, which is a similar price range to this, I would say that these, the U6t definitely have a stronger bass response, and they have a fair amount of a tamer mid-range. So I would just basically say overall that the Andromeda is beefier in the upper areas of the frequency spectrum, from the middle upwards and from the middle downwards. The U6t has a bit more beef, both in the low mids and the low end. And then the Andromeda just feels more colored overall, a little bit less transparent maybe, but definitely does have a stronger, snappier mid-range. So if you want some increased high mid presence, the Andromeda is probably more up your alley, but if you like a little bit of subdued, really smoothed out high mid, then the U6t might be more your cup of tea. The last thing I would say comparing these two is that the U6t has maybe a little bit of a softer edge on how it defines things, its detail retrieval. They're both extremely detailed IEMs, don't get me wrong, but probably a stronger snap from the Andromeda, which basically is a matter of taste, as all of this is. The U6t definitely is just a little bit easier on that area in terms of impact and stuff like that, but compared to a lot of other IEMs, the U6t is super, super impactful too. I just find the Andromeda to be one of the snappiest, kind of punchiest IEMs ever, so that's going to be hard to kind of, reach a level above it. I also recently did a review on SeeAudio's Kaguya, which runs for also a similar price to these. Not as big of a company right now, but they are honestly very slept on. You guys need to wake up and check out SeeAudio. I'll link my reviews to their Neo and Kaguya IEMs below, but anyways, I wanted to compare it to the Kaguya because I've been really into it lately, and I thought it would be interesting to see how they sound. And honestly, that was the most similar sounding comparison I found, besides maybe another 64Audio IEM. Kind of similar to the Andromeda, the U6t had more bass and less mid-range than the Kaguya, but by probably less of a margin than it did on the Andromeda. There is slightly less high end on the Kaguya than on the U6t. I found that the Kaguya just had an overall kind of sharper, crisper edge to it, which some might find increases and maximizes presence. Others might find that kind of harsh. But yeah, that definitely had a somewhat similar, at least in the ballpark, to the U6t, but definitely different. Could definitely be worth doing a comparison of those in the future. In terms of the sound stages of the Andromeda and the Kaguya and the U6t, they definitely do compete in terms of width. I know that I said that no one can compete with 64Audio width-wise. I probably would say that the U6t might have had a bit more width in them, but not by giant margins, but still more, just a little more. A smidgen. But the U6t probably does beat them in terms of separation, at least at some level. I didn't feel like it was totally blowing them out of the water, but like I've kind of been talking about, it just seems like a few hairs above it. But that being said, if you preferred the frequency responses of either of those over the U6t, the Soundstage is probably not going to change your mind. And then I also had the U12t on hand, so I was able to compare that to these, and compared to the U12t, I would say that these are definitely a little bit less bright, also just a warmer high end, not surprising. The U12t has a bit of a strong sheen going on, and then these also have a bit more bass than the U12t. They're probably closer in bass response to the Tia Trio. And then they have a pretty comparable mid-range to the U12t and the Tia Trio, though probably a bit less high mid than the U12t. All right, so those are my thoughts on SeeAudio's U6t. Overall, I am kind of obsessed with this IEM. These are the type of IEM that if you're doing casual listening, they could definitely breathe new life into your favorite songs. If you're using these for a live application, these are about as balanced and honest as you're gonna find in this price range. These are just the kind of IEM that makes you wanna, bop your head to your favorite song, or just kind of really just dive back into an album you've been, ignoring for years or something like that. I just found myself looking through old favorites and stuff because I was so curious to see how they would sound on these. I had like an audio nerds high or something like that. So yeah, and then as I mentioned earlier, these just come shockingly close in quality to some of those really, really expensive IEMs from SeeAudio or other companies. Do I understand why the other IEMs from SeeAudio are twice the price? I kind of do, but these are just, in my opinion, if you want that SeeAudio like super incredible sound, and you've been maybe eyeing their IEMs. I know I see a lot of people that are obsessed with this company despite, they've never owned any of their IEMs, but they're just so, infatuated. So if you've been waiting to pull the trigger, you've been waiting for the right IEM to come out, to be the right deal, all those things, maybe this is your opportunity to do so, because to me this feels like a great kind of middle point in their price range and product range. So yeah, overall, I'm a huge fan. I will link my written review of these below per usual. I will also link to Major Hi-Fi's IEM ranking tool, which we will add these to ASAP so that you can compare them to other SeeAudio IEMs or IEMs from other companies, similar price ranges, all that kind of stuff. If you have any questions about these that I didn't answer in the video, please let me know. I'd be happy to talk more and give you any of my insights or comparisons in the comments. And yeah, I'll be back very soon with some more reviews and videos, and until next time, happy listening.